The subject tonight is the three kayas, the Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya. And this is a very wide subject, and a lot of material is written about it. A lot of material has been taught about it over time. And so one could research that and approach that in a very dry, again, and critical or analytical or perhaps academic way. I question, however, in this day and time, in this age and in this place, the value of doing that alone. Certainly it has its value. To teach in the traditional way has extraordinary value, which has proven itself over time, again and again and again, repeatedly under all circumstances. Yet, if that alone were the method, then it would not be so that lamas over time have also spoken to their students from the heart and have tried to bring their students closer to the teaching by creating circumstances and conditions under which the students can learn more thoroughly, more intimately, more through their own experience, and therefore their own ability to cope with that experience, because that ultimately is the truest teacher. To put it in a trite way, we learn best after we've been kicked in the seat of our pants. To put it in a nicer way, this is how our brain works. This is how our mind works. We understand phenomena to have certain meaning and certain impact, and we allow it to have certain impact on us. And for that reason, often the teachings will appear all the more clearly through that phenomena that surrounds us. And we can learn more thoroughly that way. So in keeping that in mind, before we actually begin to talk about the three bodies, I would like to talk about us, meaning us as ordinary sentient beings. You've probably noticed by now that we are more frequently given teachings about our condition than we are about enlightenment. That's necessarily so because about enlightenment there isn't much to say. And the problem with that is that once one says it, one's lost the essential truth. Because enlightenment, the primordial wisdom nature, really cannot be described. It cannot be confined by words or concept. In fact, it is known to be that which is free of conceptualization. So therefore, the moment you try to put it in a box or conceptualize it in any way, you've lost the essential truth. But it's pretty easy to talk about us because we are the definitive conceptualizing organ. That's what we do best. In fact, it really is all we do. And since that's all we do, we could spend a great long time talking about us and never lose the number of definitions that we could apply to ourselves and our circumstances. They would all always fit the moment we said them. Have you ever thought about that? That the moment you declare your reality, it is so? And it's like that on the grossest level, but also on the most subtle level. In our minds and in our hearts, the moment we make distinction, the moment we determine reality, that's it. That's what it is. The continuer is continuing the continuum. And that's what we're doing. So let's talk about us. In order to be any kind of real practitioner at all, one has to take responsibility for the fact that everything one sees, everything one tastes, everything one touches, everything one smells, everything one is conscious of, everything one is conscious of. Think about that. That means, from our point of view, everything. Because all that comes to us, all that we see in our world is what we are conscious of. Everything that we are conscious of, everything that we know, everything that we perceive in any way, is of our own making, is our own fabrication. What we like to do when we hear that is to say, yes, but there's something real happening here. There's some intrinsic reality. And that's true in that the great Dharma Dhatu, or if you're not a Buddhist, the great, how can I say it, sphere of truth, has within it the potential for all appearance. What that actually means, though, if you really think about it, if you really boil it down, is that the only intrinsic nature in any piece of phenomena that you see or feel or know or conceptualize is the Buddha nature, is the Dharma, Dharmakaya rather, is the primordial wisdom nature. That is the only inherent nature in anything that one can think about, anything that one can hold, anything that one can touch, anything that one can conceptualize, smell, taste, anything. That is the only inherent nature. Also, that is our inherent nature. We also like to hold on to the fact that we are a certain way. Our conditions to us are very real, and we like that very much, and we think that that tells us a lot about ourselves and it determines us. But we also like to hold on to the fact that we have certain characteristics. We think that we look a certain way, that we have a certain appearance, that we have a certain mentality, that we have certain habits, we have a certain way of doing things. Haven't you liked to say that about yourself from time to time? Now give me my space. I have a certain way of doing things. Don't try to make me over, because I am as I am. And I'm responding to these conditions because that's the way I do things. And you say that with perfect seriousness, as though that had meaning, which is also very funny. So having said that, as though it had very meaning, let's examine it. Because there is no, if one were to examine one's nature, one would not find as the basis for that nature or the result of that examination a certain type or character or color or flavor of individual. If one were to examine that oneself from an enlightened perspective, one would certainly say, and certainly come to understand, that the only true inherent nature is the Dharmakaya, is the Buddha nature. And that nature is all-pervasive, as was stated on Sunday. It has as its nature all-pervasiveness. That's one of its characteristics. Cannot be separated, and therefore it's the same as the inherent nature of this that I seem to be perceiving as rice. And that, from the enlightened perspective, one cannot tell the difference between one's own nature and this inherent reality that we see as rice. From an unenlightened perspective, it seems as though people fall into types. People have certain modalities. But examining more closely, one finds that that is not the inherent nature. What is it then that causes everything to seem so real? What is it that seems to have the power to make us kind of crazy? Or maybe a lot of crazy? What is it that seems to have the power to convince us of its reality? What is that? Have you ever thought it through? Have you ever really sat down and tried to really think it through? When you were really challenged, when you really couldn't keep your head above water, have you ever really sat down and tried to reason it through? No, not when you can't keep your head above water. You haven't. And the reason why you haven't is because at that time you are very preoccupied. And you are preoccupied with being who you are, operating in your traditional way, needing your space because you have a certain way of doing things, and reacting as you do to certain conditions in the way that you were brought up, which is another thing people like to say. So you haven't thought it through. Occasionally you find the very good student who wants to think it through in their practice. But even within that student, unless that student has reached some degree of realization, what happens with that student is that they definitely have their lives cut in half. There's this part over here where you sit down and you contemplate this stuff in your practice, and then you clearly stand up and say, now I finished that. Now I'm going to go home and be myself. So you get up from your practice, and that's your piece of the day right there. It's right there. And you get up and you walk out of the room, and there are all these little things that happen in our consciousness that tell us that we have just passed from the unreal to the real. And we tell ourselves that, yes, but this is real. We all do that. Every one of us. Until we reach a state of realization in which we can develop the spaciousness within our minds. And I mean spaciousness, where we are not crowded by confusion. And the relaxed conditions, the auspicious conditions. And finally, the virtue and merit and level of purity, to where we have some taste of our inherent nature. Once we have some taste of our inherent nature, there is something else to look at besides our own confusion. There is at least an awareness of something else. Eventually, over a period of time with very intense practice, that spaciousness will build, that awareness will build. The process will continue until at some point we will accumulate the conditions that purify the mind and the view sufficiently to where we can remain fairly stable in that state of spaciousness and pure perception, pure awareness, unconditional awareness and non-specific awareness of the empty state of luminosity. The kinds of conditions that must be created in order for that to happen are not small change. You're talking about a great deal of work. You're talking about a great deal of determination. But that will always be the result if one works very hard. And the reason why that will always be the result, as I stated Sunday, is because of the all-pervasiveness of the Dharmakaya. It's there, so it's there. You don't have to make it. You can't shrink it. You can't destroy it. You can't move it away. You can't lose it. You can't make it any bigger. You could not create it if it were not there. So when merit is accumulated and the conditions have become so full, then one will see that nature, most assuredly. In the same way that if one has a window, one knows that on the other side of the window there is something, right? Let's say you're on the outside of a house and you're looking in, or let's say the opposite. Let's say you're inside a house and you're looking out. You know the sky's up there. Nobody can move the sky. Who can move the sky? Can you move the sky? You can't move the sky. The sky's always going to be there. It may look a little blue or it may look a little gray, but it's going to be there so long as there's a world. And if you know we have the condition of the world, we're going to have a sky. So if you have a window that through the ages has become very, very dingy and encrusted and dark and horrible, you may have to really take one of those scrapers, and take a hammer and a chisel, that's it, take a hammer and chisel and sort of beat at it a little bit, try not to break it, and then pretty soon you can scrape it really good, and you can take a razor blade and you can really go over it, and pretty soon then you can get down to the point where you're doing Windex, which takes a very long time. But a thorough scrubbing with Windex at the very last moment will definitely kick you over the edge. And at that point, you know certainly you will see the sky. The certainty is due to nothing else. It's not due to anything else other than the natural conditions. That when you clean the glass's nature is to be clear, and beyond that is definitely the sky. It's a lucid elegy, but it helps us to understand. We wouldn't give up on cleaning the window, would we? I mean, if we knew the sky were out there and we had to live in that house, would we give up on that? We would keep on going and cleaning and cleaning and cleaning until finally we could look outside. Well, then why do we give up on enlightenment? But we do all the time. We walk out of our practice. We walk through some hallway in our minds that says, now let's go to the real world, and then we're in the real world. That's what we think. It's really confused, isn't it? Don't we have everything backwards? Why do we have everything backwards? Do we have everything backwards because we're defective? Do we have everything backwards because we're... Well, I actually know of some people that think that probably everything in the universe has as its inherent nature the Buddha, but there's a few flaws, there's a few flukes, and that they are one of them. That somehow, when the Buddha nature was appearing as phenomena, due to our perception, well, we don't think about that. We think about it's just happening. It's just like the Big Bang, all of a sudden phenomena. That's what we think. And somewhere in that, some great cosmic flatulence happened, and there was some piece of phenomena that got out without its inherent nature being the Buddha nature. Have you ever had that thought? Never? Not like that. Not like that, but similar to that, right? Haven't you ever thought the truth must be true for everyone else but you? Well, you may have a case of cosmic flatulence, but ultimately, there's no such thing. This sounds like a very strange beginning to teachings on the three kayas, doesn't it? In fact, I think it's rather skillful. And the reason why is because when we understand the nature of the three kayas, we begin to understand the nature of miraculous appearance in the world, or in any of the realms of cyclic existence. Just like our own inability to perceive the miraculous, just like our own lack of understanding about the appearance of the Buddha nature, just like our own confusion about ourselves, we are confused about this matter as well. And the basis for that confusion is identical. It's exactly the same. We see the Buddhist teachings in the world. We see the gathering of the Sangha in the world. We see the appearance, really, of the Buddha's miraculous activity in the world. We see, amazingly, Guru Rinpoche's activity being carried out. Right in front of our eyes, we see these things. And we see our own teachers in the world, and due to our confusion, we don't know what we see. We have no understanding for what we see. We do with these miraculous appearances the same as what we do with our own understanding of ourselves. In fact, a really effective way to understand how deluded our perception is to look deeply and courageously and without fail, that is to say, without duping ourselves, and see how it is that we relate to and how it is that we perceive these miraculous appearances in the world. A lot can be told about us from that. If our understanding is dull or dim, and we haven't really much sense of what's going on, then that's a clear indication of the state of our glass, if you will, whether it has a lot of grime on it. And there are those who in the world who truly really mistake the intention of these miraculous appearances in the world. A good example of that, or an extreme example, I should say, would be, let's say, a parent who has a child that is a monk or nun and thinks that the child is involved in some kind of cult or something like that, thinking that the child is lost the way because they are no longer their former religion, whatever that might have been. And that kind of mistaking would be a very extreme, a very dense form of delusion. But there are very dense forms of delusion that don't take on such an extreme appearance. The appearance of this miraculous occurrence in the world might be understood in that one might think of one's teaching experience or one's practice experience as being a problem rather than a solution. And how many of us think like that? It's too much of a problem for me to practice. It takes too much of my time. You see? It just takes too much time. So it's a problem when I practice. So my practice is a problem. Now what happens when you think that? What do you think that means? That means that you are mistaking the appearance of the miraculous in the world, instead of understanding that the miraculous is the medicine for which, due to your need, you should be running or hobbling or crawling or whatever it takes thousands of miles to get to in order to provide the antidote for our sickness or our suffering. We should be understanding that opportunity to practice and the opportunity to learn, the opportunity to accept teachings and to follow the teachings accordingly, whatever form they might take, if they are within the realm of pure path, then instead of looking at that as a problem, we should look at that as a great blessing, a great antidote, a great solution. So we mistake the appearance of the miraculous in the world. We who have taken vows and are supposed to be Buddhists do that every day, every day. And in doing that, we break the refuge vows. Isn't that amazing? Every time we think of our practice as a problem, we break the refuge vows. And then there are those who, and I think I gave this teaching previously in the context of Guru Yoga or devotional practice. In devotional practice, there are 3 levels of student. One student is the poor student, one student is the intermediate student, and one student is the very, I can't think of the word. Not advanced, no, that's not a good word for that. Means like the student who has the auspicious condition. Well, let's call him the student that has the auspicious condition. The poor student thinks that the teacher is a very nice person. Thinks, well, I'm going to have a teacher, I think I'll have this one. Looks like a nice person. Looks like they're nice. Looks like I have a good experience when I see this teacher. I have a good rapport with this teacher. I get along with this teacher pleases me. I like what this teacher is saying. I think this teacher says very fine things. I think this teacher is very kind. I've examined the teacher's life and it looks like the teacher's doing okay. So that is the very poor student, obviously. Unfortunately, many of us fall in that category. But that's the very poor student. The intermediate student would be the student who has examined and seen that the teacher is capable of transmitting the teachings of the lineage in a pure way, and primarily is aware that the teacher can transmit from a pure lineage that has been practiced purely and with pure intention, and realizes that under those conditions one can make great progress. The student realizes that the teacher's intentions are to benefit beings and has examined to see whether the teacher has shown any indication of doing what they do for another reason. And the student feels that the teacher has good qualities, excellent qualities of intelligence, virtue, compassion, loving kindness, that kind of thing. And having determined all of that, the student wants to study with the teacher. That's only an intermediate student. That's really not the best condition under which to practice. Under the best conditions, the student realizes the all-pervasiveness of the sphere of truth. The student realizes that the teacher's activity is enlightened activity, as evidenced by the fruit of that activity. Realizes that the teacher's activity is the sort of activity that produces great benefit in sentient beings, and realizes, therefore, that it must be the miraculous appearance of the Buddha nature. Realizes that the teacher themselves, in order for that to be occurring, must have some awareness or wisdom sufficient to produce that kind of enlightened activity. Therefore, the teacher themselves must be the very presence of the Buddha nature. And recognizes the teacher as the same as their own mind, their own nature, inseparable from the Buddha nature that is their true nature, and therefore accordingly would strive for that teacher, would learn from that teacher, even if it cost them their very lives. Because the teacher is understood to be none other than one's own face, one's own nature, and inseparable from that. In other words, not seen as an outside source, but understood to be one's own face. That is the most excellent student. That's the word I was looking for. Excellent. Those students are very, very rare. Very rare, indeed. And in this day and time, they are almost never found. But it's something for us all to work toward. And one way that we can work toward that is to understand something of the three bodies of the Buddha. And so, therefore, I'm going this whole long way around the mountain so that we can understand through our own experience. Because if you were listening honestly and courageously, you should have been able to find yourself somewhere in all of this. Have you? Have you recognized some of your own activity? Have you recognized some of your own presumption? Have you recognized some of your own stupidity? Have you recognized some of your own fault? Well, good. Welcome to the world. There's no shame in that. Where there is a shame is where we cannot recognize these things. Then there is shame. Because if we cannot recognize these things sufficiently to be wanting passionately, if you will, to change them, then, for the most part, the auspicious conditions by which we can make progress on the path are not present. And for this time, in this space, we are lost. Which is why, when we begin these teachings, we must always examine our motivation. We must always examine what our real goal is in hearing these teachings and in practicing. We must always commit and recommit, again and again, to enlightened awareness. Because there is no other reason for hearing these teachings. And there is no other reason for practicing. There is no other reason for being involved in Dharma at all. And these things should be solid within us. And the only way they can be solid is through repetition. Because they will never be solid through one single insight. If you've had one mind-blowing, cataclysmic insight, or emotional experience, or vision, or something, some kind of cosmic hoo-ha, with cosmic flatulence, maybe, that has told you that you are really with the program, then you're in real bad shape. I just don't know how else to say it to you, because there is no experience like that. There is none. There is no such experience like that. Any experience that feels like that falls in the category of delusion. And it is basically involved with perception of self and conceptualization about self, and that is always a deluded experience. Self-nature, because self-nature has no inherent solidity, and only the Buddha nature is the true nature. Because of that, one cannot have such an experience in a clear way. Now, for the three kayas, they're all waiting patiently for me to stop describing them and get on to some serious teaching here. If that's what you think, then you're not going to get any serious teaching. Now, why do you think that's true? Okay. Let's describe it from the three bodies, from the perspective of the appearance of the Buddha in the world. Because then again we can understand. The Dharmakaya, kaya means body actually, or form like that. The Dharmakaya can be understood as the irrefutable union of luminosity and wisdom. Luminosity and wisdom here are completely undifferentiated. Indistinguishable from one another. Therefore, they do not fall into any of the mental categories that we recognize. Dharmakaya does not fall into any of the mental categories that we recognize. The nature of Dharmakaya is such, however, that it can be called the sphere of truth, in that within the nature of the Dharmakaya lies all inherent potency. In that when any appearance does occur, for instance, as the appearance of the Buddha in the world, the wisdom of the Dharmakaya is present. The seed of the Dharmakaya is present. The nature of the Dharmakaya is present. But from the perspective of the realm or the level of Dharmakaya awareness, there is no distinction. That is to say that when we say in the Dharmakaya lies all potency, that potency is not an item. It cannot be conceptualized. It cannot be distinguished. The nature is pure luminosity and wisdom. It is, in fact, the nature of emptiness. Emptiness in that there is no substance. The nature is without limitation, without form, and without formlessness. Without distinction or specificity of any kind. Yet, all things arise, as they must, from Dharmakaya, by virtue of the fact that there is no place that Dharmakaya is not. And that's really a bad way to put it, because when we think of that, we think of something going somewhere. So let's put it, but it's almost necessary to communicate in that way, at least to Westerners, I think. What you should look at instead, however, if you will, is that as a characteristic of Dharmakaya, we must recognize all pervasiveness. Sangdrup, do you know lots about Dharmakaya? Okay. You better listen. So, Dharmakaya is also understood as having two inherent qualities. One of them is original perfection or perfection upon arising, completion upon arising, if you will, or perfection upon arising. And secondly, continual, spontaneous, unceasing perfection. And that is the nature. Secondly is the Sambhogakaya. Everybody's looking at me like, how do you spell that? Sambhogakaya. Sambhogakaya. Sambhogakaya can be understood as the appearance or emanation body. It arises, as all things arise, from the Dharmakaya. It has as its essential nature all qualities that the Dharmakaya has. It is, in its essence, Dharmakaya. It is fundamentally inseparable from Dharmakaya. It has as its condition appearance, and therefore there is a kind of separability or separation. But the separation is not a true separation as we understand it, in that there is no separation from Dharmakaya. It can be understood better as play or display. Display, like that. Due to our perception, and only due to our perception, is it possible, only through our perception, is it possible to consider that Sambhogakaya in its display is separate, in that emptiness we think is separate from form. You see, our formlessness is separate from form. But you must understand that that is our concept that occurs at this level, the level of experience of sentient beings, in confusion. That is confused perception. At the level of Sambhogakaya, while there is appearance, and in that regard there is some form of separability, distinction, that distinction is not a fundamental distinction as we understand it. The way that we would understand that, again, is to separate formless from form. And that meaning would occur to us with our fallible interpretation. And so it does. In that when we see the appearance of the Buddha, we look at a picture of the Buddha in Sambhogakaya form, we do not understand that we are looking at emptiness. We look at something with our eyes. We do not understand the appearance of Dharmakaya. We understand only appearance as separate from non-appearance. See? All of the appearances that the Sambhogakaya form takes, and I'm talking about the appearances of Sambhogakaya Buddhas that we see in pictures and tankas and things like that. Sambhogakaya Bodhisattvas, actually I should say. The Sambhogakaya Bodhisattvas appear as they do in different positions and with different colors and with different hand implements and things like that. And each one of these has meaning. There's no need to go, I don't plan to go into that tonight, because that's a very long teaching, and we can have that at some later time, but this is not the condition that I wish to produce at this time. And besides, it's available in books that we have in the gift store. We're always asking, teachers are always being asked for that teaching, and it's actually very readily available information. So this isn't really what I'm trying to do tonight. One characteristic of Sambhogakaya is this: while there is appearance, while there is emanation, while there is what appears to us to be separation, Sambhogakaya is truly the appearance of the Dharmakaya nature. And there is no true separation, as I have already said. And one characteristic specifically of Sambhogakaya is that all conditions, is that the right word? Conditions that are produced at the Sambhogakaya level are, if you will, conditionless conditions. That is to say, they do not arise from solid, definable cause, and they do not create solid, definable result in the karmic realm. Meaning that Sambhogakaya does not create karmic result, therefore perpetuating the wheel of death and rebirth, cyclic existence. It arises purely and is purely completed. So you can sort of think of it as pure, unconditional form, if you will. That's real loose, but I'm trying to make brain connections happen here. And pure, conditionless effect. Okay, a way to understand this, think about this, is to think of the difference between Sambhogakaya appearance, as I've just described it, and ordinary appearance, as we understand it, as we are used to perceiving. Every ordinary appearance that we perceive arises from some previous cause, arises from some previous interdependent cause and result. In fact, arises through not one cause, but a chain of many causes since time out of mind. Isn't that right? And everything that we see right now in the ordinary realm will continue to produce result due to our relationship with it. So if you see the appearance of an ordinary person, then even from your point of view, your meeting with that ordinary person has been brought about by causes and will continue to produce results down the road. And the way that it will produce results is because of the interaction, the cause and effect relationship that occurs between yourself and that person and your reaction to that person. So that will continue to occur. On the Sambhogakaya, however, none of that is true. You see that? You see what I'm saying here? None of that is true. In that Sambhogakaya form arises naturally and spontaneously from Dharmakaya, is the same and inseparable from the Dharmakaya, has no cause and effect relationships as its basis. other than the sphere of truth, and will not produce karmic cause and effect that must continue to play itself out. It is spontaneously liberated in that regard. Some of you are clicking in, that's good. Some of you are looking like, but we do the best we can. Let's examine Nirmanakaya. Nirmanakaya. The Nirmanakaya form arises from the Dharmakaya and arises from the Sambhogakaya, as these two are inseparable. And is inseparable from both of them, from both Dharmakaya and Sambhogakaya. Nirmanakaya, or Tulku, is understood to appear in the world in several different ways. It can appear as an artist or creator of some type, artistic creator of some type, that can create tankas, statues, temples, different enlightened forms associated with enlightened activity and these enlightened forms can produce great benefit and can plant seeds in the minds of sentient beings. Such as when a person sees, let's say, the stupa, like the stupa is out there, it plants a seed in their continuum that will certainly ripen as the cause for future relationship with enlightenment and ultimately for enlightenment. Their seeing the stupa will create, at some point, will plant the seed in their continuum for future enlightenment. So tulkus can be artistic in that way. They can create forms in that way. See if I can remember, think about it. There are born tulkus, that birth tulkus that engage the miraculous activity merely by their birth. These tulkus can take the form of monks and nuns. They can, but not always. They can take the form of ordinary sentient beings, but also not always. In fact, hardly ever. They can take the form of animals, birds, even insects. They can take the form of formless creatures. They can take the form of butchers. Yeah, they can. They can take the form of butchers. And through their slaughtering of sentient beings, through the connection of their slaughtering, can liberate them at the time of their death. They can take the form of prostitutes, who by their sexual activity can plant the seed of enlightenment in the continuum of a person's mind stream. They can take the form of I want to say dentists, but I don't think that's really in the text. But it must be so. We suffer so greatly with dentists. Surely, surely. There must be enlightenment that comes from that, don't you think? Well, anyway. Lawyers? No. No. Get real. But they can take birth forms, such as the ones that I've named, and sometimes very surprising ones, and bring about the auspicious result. Tulkus can take the form of objects, actually, such as the Rupakayas you see empowered there, the form, the statues that you see empowered there. Ritual implements that are so precious that merely upon seeing them, the seed of enlightenment is planted in the continuum of someone's experience, and they are brought to liberation. There are many objects like that in Nepal, and there were many in Tibet. I think there are still some in Tibet. But there are objects that must be considered tulkus, and that they are incarnations of the Buddha's miraculous activity. And then there are supreme emanations. And these supreme emanations are those tulkus who carry on the activity of the Buddha, or rather the deeds of the Buddha. That is to say, that directly bring people to enlightenment through their efforts, through teaching or, what have you, like that kind of spiritual leadership. The Nirmanakaya form must be understood as a direct emanation and therefore inseparable from the Dharmakaya and Sambhogakaya. It must be understood that these three bodies must occur together. There can be no Nirmanakaya and no Sambhogakaya without Dharmakaya. There can be no Sambhogakaya without Dharmakaya and Nirmanakaya. And it occurs across the board. The three must occur together. They are, you wouldn't say interdependent, you would say more inseparable. Like that. And even though from our experience you might think that there is a time when the Buddha has come and there is a time that the Buddha has gone, certainly you must understand that in the world there is always the Buddha's intention. And even when there is the disappearance of the Buddha's enlightened activity, one must understand that always in samsara there is the Buddha's enlightened activity, that it would be considered like a lighthouse that goes around, or a wave that touches here and runs across through all, but at the tips may be only seen cyclically. And so one can understand the appearance of the enlightened teachers in the world, the appearance of the tulkus in the world, the appearance of the Buddha in the world, however you want to say it. One can understand that in that regard. Now what happens is that we don't understand that. And when we see this activity, we misinterpret it. We think a man or a woman was born, he or she teaches us some dharma, we have some interaction, and then either we or they die. We don't get it. We just don't get the big picture. Or we may think that I used to have this teacher, but now I have this teacher, and I'm mad at that teacher, and I'm going to go see that teacher. We don't get it. We're just not plugging in. We don't really have, in one sense, at this level of perception, we don't really have the microchip to compute that little bit of information. Because all of our microchips are telling us that we are inherently real, and that circumstance is inherently real. And we do not, because we have never tasted the nature, we cannot understand the connection between phenomenal appearance and nature. We cannot understand their inseparability. Then, if the appearance of Dharmakaya in the world can be called a tulku, so then what does that make us? Have you ever asked yourself that? This is why Lord Buddha teaches us that we have no inherent reality. Well, are we? Nothing. The Buddha teaches us that we have no soul. That thing that we like to hold on to, that we think is our big number up there in the sky somewhere. You know, the big guy up there. Or that higher self stuff. The Buddha teaches us that this is not true, that this is a misunderstanding. This that you cling to now is merely confusion. It is merely clinging. It occurs due to an assumption of distinction and duality. And once that assumption is made, it's like a movie begins to play. And that movie is basically the continuum of that false assumption. And that's the movie that we are watching 24 hours a day since time out of mind. Aeons and aeons of cyclic existence. And it's like we don't know to turn it off. We don't know to stop. And we could stop. We could stop like that. Boom, like that. But we don't know to do that. And if someone could tell us, just do that, before our hand could reach for the knob, and this of course is an analogy, before our hand could reach for the knob, our delusion and our fixation on self-nature is so potent that we would talk ourselves out of the reality of that knob, the potential of that activity, and we would forget the original message anyway. So we are unable to do it, just as strongly as if we were quadriplegics. Just like that. But our experience is merely the continuum of false assumption. All that we assume about ourselves has no inherent reality, no basis. Our nature is the Dharmakaya. Dharmakaya is all-pervasive, and it would be impossible for it to be otherwise. Why then do we cling to our delusion? Why do we fight for it? Why do we claim it to be us and really fight hard for it? And say, yes, all this is true, but I have something going on here. Because that's the nature of delusion. The nature of drunkenness is to remain drunk. The nature of sobriety is not to be drunk. It's like that, isn't it? And we're still drinking. As monks and nuns, have you ever thought that not partaking of alcohol or substances that confuse the mind might have a deeper level of meaning as well? That you've actually taken a vow not to become deluded in that drunken way. not to maintain that delusion, not to keep absorbing it. And that's a very deep vow, much deeper than bending the old elbow. But it's something that we all have embraced, should have embraced, must embrace, if we wish to reach the goal. And of course the goal is the precious awakening called Buddhahood.
Thank you.